Now pay attention, 007. You never know, this may just save your life. Yes, this is my long-waited-for response to Mr. Epsilon on the subject of James Bond. Because, as interesting as his little fanboy talk of the films was, there is a much more interesting, true story.
You must be joking.
As I learned from my predecessor, Bond, I never joke about my work.
Yes, a line that Q would often say. That was the best quality clip I could have of him saying it, and unfortunately it's in one of the worst Bond movies. However, the reason that Q appears as a character, the reason Q has so much brilliant one-liners, because during the Second World War, Ian Fleming basically was Q. After Dunkirk, we realised that our tactics weren't exactly going to work very well. We had a lot of governments in exile, we had a lot of militaries in exile sitting in our country doing nothing, basically. The Free French, we had the Free Polish, pretty much the whole of Europe's in-exile forces were around them. Some of them we kind of integrated into our own military with like the RAF Polish division, which was awesome and basically won us the Battle of Britain because they were the best squadron. But within one section we decided to do what the British do best and fight dirty. Yes, throughout history the British have always won their wars by breaking all the rules. What was set up was called the Special Operations Executive. Now, Churchill, being Churchill, gave a very basic brief to the Special Operations Executive Command. Gentlemen, I wish you to set Europe ablaze. That's Churchill for you, straight to the point when he wasn't ridiculously micromanaging. Anyhow, that's a complete tangent, and I really shouldn't go there. I probably could do a video on Churchill at some point in the future, but yes, I've not got a very high opinion of him as a historian. Anyhow, the Special Operations Executive. The whole concept of the Special Operations Executive was asymmetrical warfare, or as we call it today, terrorism. Basically fucking with the enemy, not wearing a uniform, behind their lines, and coordinating with the resistance fighters. Terrorism, basically. Now, this unit was led by Major General Colin Gubbins. Yes, he was something of a pioneer of this kind of warfare, and he'd been developing all these tactics in the background. Churchill spotted him doing this. All the other people in charge really didn't like his attitude, didn't like his sort of combined forces attitude. They didn't like his tactics attitude because they didn't think it was the British thing to do. Oh boy, are they ignorant of history. But he was put forward because of the desperation of the times. His idea was put through, and they ended up with the SOE, which worked through all three branches of the military: the RAF, the Royal Navy, and the Army. Now, Fleming, Commander Ian Fleming, was in the Navy part of the SOE. To be precise, the Naval Intelligence part. And he was something of an ideas man. He had been refused active service in the regular military because he was, I believe, the category fitness category he was under was B1, which meant he wasn't suitable for frontline duties. He was only suitable for desk jobs. And any attempt to sort of get him up to A1 fitness category had completely failed, and nobody had cheated it like they did for poor old Sergeant Kenneth Williams. Another story I may expand on in the future. But anyhow, Commander Fleming was known for his wacky ideas, and many of these ideas were, through the technology of the time, adapted into various gadgets the SOE used, which really pushed the bounds of the 1940s technology to its utter limits. And short of Turing's development of the computer in Bletchley, this was the highest technology available on the planet at the time. So when Bond goes into its kind of sci-fi phase, that's probably because of the fact that the SOE gadgets were pretty damn sci-fi for the time. They were ridiculous and very well made, not by Fleming. Fleming was an ideas man. Fleming also was a tactics man. He came up with a book which I don't believe has actually been released or published by anybody. I've been looking for ages for this, but it was something like 200 ideas for confusing the enemy. And yes, there were some very odd ones on there, one of which actually helped with the D-Day landings and became Operation Mincemeat. Idea was, I believe it was some 40 something, and it was bracketed not a very pleasant one, and that was an underestimate. His idea was we get a corpse, we dress it up as a officer, and we drop it somewhere the Germans will find it with a big bunch of fake invasion plans to act as a diversion. So all their tanks are going to be in the wrong place. And in order to make it credible, they actually created an entire backstory for this officer. They built up what they call legend in spy terms for a corpse, and a corpse of a man who was unfit for service, very mentally disturbed, and had committed suicide. And they gave him this war hero captain identity. Fleming even auditioned some girls from the typing pool to take the role of his girlfriend, in that he would take a photo of the girl, he would get her to write imaginary letters to him, and if German intelligence double-checked the story, they would know the girl did actually work in the typing pool. And it wasn't... it was the SOE's typing pool, but maybe that was something of an oversight. And the Germans didn't really know that much about the SOE anyway. But anyhow, we set up this thing, and believe it or not, despite all the many flaws in the plan, such as the body being frozen for several years, and there's all sorts of other things coming up in the autopsy, because the guy in charge in the place we dropped it, the Gestapo officer in charge in the place we dropped it, somewhere in Spain, I believe, was so desperate to prove his loyalty after somebody had found Jewish ancestors of his. It's always the thing with Nazi officers, somebody finds a Jewish ancestor. The guy who actually was the architect of the Holocaust, actually by his own rules, was Jewish, which is just sickening. But anyway, he was desperate to prove his loyalty, and in finding this corpse with invasion plan, he was actually telling people at the post-mortem what to do, and he was convinced he needed this person to be genuine. He completely ignored anything that didn't add up. He sent the report in to, I believe it was Rommel, who was in command at the time, and Rommel said, right, we're moving our panzers up here. And thus, when we attacked the landing beaches, there were no tanks around. And fortunately, there was there was one colonel in the SS who didn't buy this story. But another SOE operation further up the coast, involving a lot of Free French women, as dramatised in the film Female Agents, which was released recently in a cooperation between the French and the British broadcasting companies, state broadcasting companies. And their mission was basically to take this guy out before he actually talked sense into his superiors. And they succeeded as well. So between those two missions, between Mincemeat and I can't remember the code name for that operation, but between those two missions they managed to utterly confuse the Germans and make things a bit safer for the troops landing on those beaches. Because when it came to tanks, to quote one British veteran, if you saw a Panzer coming over the thing, you called in for air support because you knew our tanks were shit against them. We knew our anti-tank guns were shit against them because they were just so way in advance of anything we had. So they said, right, you call in the Typhoon rockets the bastard, because otherwise there's no way of taking them out. You're going to be you're going to be pinned down forever. So yeah, Ian Fleming, the real-life Q, created James Bond. And the funny thing is that Bond is his fantasy version of himself. He really wanted to be a field agent, but because he was categorized B1, he couldn't. And despite knowing several languages, despite being an ingenious plotter, I mean, this guy could give Batman a run for his money, seriously. He wasn't considered fit for active service, so he was behind a desk all through the war, and he was Q, basically. So, yes, Bond can be a bit silly. Yes, it is basically his desk jockey fantasy. But there's so much more to it than that, and I hope you now appreciate it.